The war goes on, and Israel seems to have no inclination to want to stop until Hamas is stopped. And Israel, of course, is being accused of war crimes. But one military leader says that's not true. He says Hamas deliberately wants Israel to kill Palestinian civilians so it can get more international support.
Israel's still trying to protect its own civilians by wiping out Hamas terror tunnels. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from the border of Israel and Gaza.
The IDF says it's destroyed more than 20 terror tunnels and killed nearly 200 Hamas terrorists since the start of its ground operation. 4 Israeli soldiers died in this confrontation with Hamas infiltrators inside Israel's border. In the firefight, IDF troops killed most of the infiltrators. They entered Israel disguised as IDF soldiers and wore suicide belts. Here on the Israeli-Gaza border, you can see the plumes of smoke coming from the fighting within Gaza City. The IDF has called up 60,000 troops for Operation Protective Edge. About 30 have died in the line of battle, and they find themselves fighting an enemy that uses the same tactics as Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Taliban in Afghanistan.
They use human shields. They attempt to lure us to kill their civilian population. It's a common theme among Islamist extremist groups in this world.
Colonel Richard Kemp commanded British ground troops in Afghanistan. He refutes the claim that Israel has committed war crimes.
Everything I've seen would suggest to me that Israel is not committing a war crime. Far from it. Israel is going further than most other countries in this world would go to prevent the loss of innocent civilian life. The people that are committing the war crimes are Hamas, who are both firing rockets into the Israeli civilian population indiscriminately and also using their own people as human shields. That is a war crime. Hamas want the Israeli Defense Force to kill their children, their women, their civilians. That's what they want to happen. They want to get the propaganda.
Former IDF spokesperson Avital Leibovich says Hamas deliberately put Palestinian civilians in harm's way during the intense fighting in Sajaya.
We are trying to do everything we can in order to make sure that the civilians are evacuating the area. However, Hamas, as we've seen in this operation time and time again, through the Ministry of Interior, is forbidding those civilians, those poor civilians, and it's really tragic. He's forbidding them from leaving those areas, and then we find ourselves in very, very tough situations.
On the diplomatic front, UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry are in the region trying to broker a ceasefire. During a visit to the front lines, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said they would expand their operation to bring quiet to Israel and a stop to Hamas rocket fire. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, on the Israeli-Gaza border.
Well, what I can say is this: once they're in it, there's no way they can stop until they do the job. And I think that the United States ought to stand aside and let Israel do what it needs to do. Israel is not in there to slaughter Palestinians. They're in there to take care of the terrorists and to do away with the tunnels and do away with the rocket installations all over Gaza. And until that gets done, Israel will not be safe. So all these cries for a ceasefire are wasting their breath. It seems like to me we need to do something. Well, protesters in Europe, of course, have taken the streets against Israel. But here at home, American Christians are showing their support for that nation. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington.
Pat, Christian believers have gathered at the 9th Annual Christians United for Israel Summit. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to the group by video link, and featured speakers include the organization's founder, Texas Pastor John Hagee, and Israeli Ambassador Ron Dermer. Thousands of Christians came from across the country to the meeting here in Washington. One of the major topics at Monday's summit was dispelling myths about the state of Israel.
The American people see through the lies, the distortions in the media coverage. You know, today, you cannot believe what you hear, you can't believe what you read, you can't even believe what you see. You know what the real difference is? Hamas exists to kill. Sometimes Israel has to kill to exist.
The panel was moderated by CBN President Michael Little. CBN terrorism analyst Eric Stakelback was also a featured speaker. The evening ended with a celebration with Jews and their American Christian supporters. The conflict between Israel and Hamas hasn't stopped people from immigrating to the Holy Land. Several hours ago, a plane full of American Jews landed in Tel Aviv. George Thomas brings us that story from Ben Gurion International Airport.
This morning, Ari Benjamin Pfeffer, his wife and 4 children from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, landed at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport. They were greeted by Israel's Prime Minister.
It's good to see you on any day, but it's especially good to see you on this day.
Pfeffer and 230 people from the United States and Canada made Aliyah, or immigrated to Israel.
It's very important for all Israelis and all Jews to understand that this is our homeland.
One of the youngest arrivals was this little guy. The oldest was this 89-year-old from Chicago.
The moment you put your foot on Israeli soil, what was that like? Tell me about it.
Quite exciting. Quite exciting.
The former chief rabbi of Israel told CBN News their presence in Israel is an answer to the ongoing rocket fire and conflict with terrorists in Gaza.
Our victory is on the shoulders of these children, sons and daughters of Jacob, who came to build their home.
Max Kalber from Chicago is not only becoming a citizen, but is joining the Israeli military.
The fact that the situation is not so great here, it just makes me, that's the reason why I'm coming, makes me feel strong about what I'm doing.
Each new immigrant gets this booklet, What's Next? A guide to your first steps in Israel. By the way, 26 of the new immigrants will be living in the southern Israeli cities of Ashkelon and Beersheba, epicenter for so many of the rocket attacks from Hamas.
Pfeffer's new home will be close to the Gaza border, but that doesn't scare him.
That we're not going anywhere. That we're firm, we're entrenched, this is our place, we're comfortable, and do what you will, but we're immovable.
The trip was co-sponsored by Nefesh B'Nefesh, a group that has helped more than 40,000 individuals settle in Israel. The group's leader says their efforts send an unmistakable message to the terrorists who want to destroy Israel.
Enemies think that they can knock at the Jewish people, that they can destroy the Jewish people, that they think that they can deter the Jewish people. And with all the rockets, not one single Jew canceled their plans to move to Israel.
George Thomas, CBN News, Tel Aviv, Israel.
European leaders are debating possible sanctions on Russia after the attack that brought down the Malaysian jetliner, but they're not expected to act quickly as investigators are still trying to find out exactly what happened. Pro-Russian rebels finally turned over the plane's black boxes days after it was shot down over eastern Ukraine. The crash site is already compromised, and forensics teams face enormous challenges poring over the debris scattered across 13 square miles. Rebels hauled away most of the nearly 300 dead bodies Monday to a refrigerated train. Well, here at home along the Texas border, Governor Rick Perry is sending 1,000 National Guard troops to the Mexican border to catch criminals exploiting the recent surge of immigrant children. Perry's critics say the move is about political posturing and a possible 2016 presidential run. But as Heather Sells reports, the governor says his main concern is border security.
More than 57,000 children have entered the U.S. illegally since October. But Governor Rick Perry is concerned that criminal gang members are also slipping through.
Drug cartels, human traffickers, individual criminals are exploiting this tragedy for their own criminal opportunities.
Border Patrol agents have seen the criminal surge right alongside the tens of thousands of innocent children trying to cross. They're concerned that gang members from Central America will come here and try to start new crime rings.
The Border Patrol Processing Center in Nogales has confirmed, agents there have confirmed that at least 16 unaccompanied minors have admitted to being members of the very violent El Salvadorian MS-13 gang. And what that means is they're coming through just as any other minor would, and they're getting processed.
The governor says the Guard will act as a, quote, force multiplier to catch them trying to slip through.
We're planning on referring and deterring.
But critics say the Guard's impact will be limited since by law it can't make any arrests.
I don't see the National Guard being of particularly good help in this instance.
President George W. Bush sent 6,000 National Guard troops to the border in 2006, and President Obama extended that deployment while sending a second wave to 4 border states in 2010. Governor Perry is already spending an extra $1.3 million a week to get extra help with border security from the Texas Department of Public Safety. The deployment of National Guard troops will cost Texas some $12 million a month, and Perry hopes that Washington will eventually help foot that bill. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Pat, one of Perry's critics, Joaquin Castro, Texas congressman and a Democrat, accused Perry of militarizing the border.
Well, it's way overdue to militarize the border. The border is porous and people are pouring in. But I think we should make one corrective statement. Apparently in Honduras and in El Salvador, Nicaragua, the drug cartels are taking a firm hold. Instead of sending drug shipments on water through those channels, they've now decided to move drugs up through Central America into Mexico and into the United States. And it's the insatiable appetite of Americans for illegal drugs that is fueling this particular criminal element. And so they have terrorized the civilian population, and it does make it very hard. And so some of these people are indeed fleeing terror. It's just a question of which ones are and which aren't, and how we know, I just really can't figure out.
The U.S. is condemning the Islamic radicals who have forced thousands of Christians to flee for their lives from Iraq's second largest city. Last week, the so-called Islamic State used loudspeakers to threaten the Christians in Mosul. They gave them till midday Saturday to either convert to Islam, pay a protection tax, or die. So the vast majority of Christians then fled to other cities. A State Department spokesman says the U.S. is, quote, outraged about the death threat. This may be the final exodus of Christians from Mosul, where Christian communities have lived for nearly 2,000 years. The Tennessee State Public Library is putting a database of family Bibles online. Bibles once served as the place where families recorded milestones such as weddings, births, and deaths. The state of Tennessee didn't even require birth certificates until 1908, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security still accepts the family Bible's list of births as one proof of citizenship for those with no birth certificate. The Bible in the database includes one from 1538 and a book dating back to 1753. Remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website, cbnnews.com.